searching for your purpose. And the fact that you're searching is already the problem. Not because purpose doesn't exist, not because the question is wrong, but because the search itself, the way you've been taught to conduct it, is designed to keep you looking in the only direction that guarantees you won't find it. You've been handed a map drawn by people who have never been where you're trying to go, and the longer you follow it, the more convincing it gets that the destination simply doesn't exist. The map has different names: Ikigai, your why, your passion, the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what someone will pay for. Each version promises to reveal your purpose through a careful inventory of your conscious preferences. And each version makes the same foundational error. It assumes that purpose is something your ego can locate by examining itself. That if you think hard enough, reflect deeply enough, journal honestly enough, the answer will surface. Jung would not argue with the desire. He would argue with the instrument. The ego, that careful, image-conscious, approval-seeking part of you, is the least qualified thing in your psyche to recognize what you're actually called to do. It knows what is safe. It knows what fits the story you've already built about yourself. And it will, with total sincerity, confuse those two things with purpose. Jung saw something different in the patients who arrived already carrying their answers and still couldn't move. He observed that most people don't fail to find purpose because they lack self-knowledge. They fail because purpose in the Jungian sense doesn't come from self-knowledge at all. It comes from something beneath the ego entirely. What he called the self, which communicates not through calm reflection, but through dreams you keep ignoring, envy you're embarrassed to admit, fantasies you've decided are impractical, and a restlessness that no achievement has managed to quiet. If you've spent months or years doing the exercises and still feel like you're circling something you can't name, that feeling is not a failure of effort, it's information. This video is about what Jung called vocation. Not the career version, not the passion version, but the one that emerges from the unconscious, whether the ego consents or not, and what it costs to finally stop pretending you haven't already heard it. The question is not whether you have a purpose. The question is whether you're willing to live the one that's actually yours. The self-help industry did not invent the question of purpose. It invented a method for answering it, and the method has a specific shape. Look inward, identify your strengths, locate your passion, find where those two things meet a market need, and call the intersection your calling. The Ikigai diagram, the Find Your Why exercise, the Strengths Finder report. Each framework differs in branding. The architecture is identical across all of them. You survey your conscious preferences and draw conclusions from the survey. The problem with this architecture is not that it produces bad answers, it produces convincing ones. You can complete a purpose workshop in a Saturday afternoon and emerge with a statement that sounds true, that you believe when you say it, and that will still leave you feeling hollow 2 years later. The statement was assembled from real data, things you do love, things you are good at, things that matter to you. The method just failed to account for one variable. The ego that conducted the survey was also the ego that selected which data to include. Your ego has spent your entire life learning what is safe to want. It absorbed your parents' fears about financial security, your culture's definitions of success, the particular set of ambitions that earned you approval in the environments you grew up in. By the time you sit down to take inventory of your passions, the inventory has already been edited. The desires that made people uncomfortable were filed away. The fantasies that seemed impractical were dismissed before they could be examined. The thing you most want, the one that makes you feel slightly ashamed when you picture it clearly, was never included in the survey at all. Jung called this the problem of living a persona rather than a life. The persona is the face the ego constructs for social survival, useful, necessary, and completely incapable of telling you who you are beneath it. Asking the persona to locate your calling is like asking the mask to describe the face. This is why the purpose frameworks produce answers that feel both true and insufficient. They are true about your persona. They say nothing about yourself. The exercise for tonight is not another inventory. Before you sleep, write down the one ambition you have never told anyone, the one you immediately follow with a reason it wouldn't work. That specific thing. The fact that you already know which one it is tells you the survey was never complete. In the next part, we go to what Jung actually meant by vocation, and why the word itself is the first clue that the map you've been using was always pointed the wrong direction. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. The Latin root of vocation is vocare, to be called, not to call yourself, not to choose, to be addressed by something that speaks whether you're listening or not. Jung used this word with clinical precision in his essay, The Development of Personality, and he meant it as a technical term, not a spiritual one. Vocation, in the Jungian sense, is an irrational factor, his words, that destines a person to emancipate themselves from the crowd and from its well-worn paths. He wrote that true personality is always a vocation, and that vocation acts like a law from which there is no escape. The fact that following it sometimes leads to ruin, he noted, means nothing to the person who has heard it. They must obey their own law, as if a demon were whispering to them of new and wonderful paths. Demon, here, is not a metaphor for motivation. Jung meant something specific, a psychic force that operates with the objectivity of an external fact, independent of what the ego wants or fears. The demon of Socrates, the inner voice that Goethe described and Napoleon acknowledged. In each case, the voice arrived before the person was ready for it, pointed somewhere the conscious mind had not chosen, and persisted until it was either answered or suppressed at great cost. This is the structural difference between ego purpose and vocation. Ego purpose is assembled. You gather evidence, weigh options, and construct an answer that fits the person you currently understand yourself to be. Vocation arrives. It has no interest in whether the timing is convenient, whether your parents will approve, or whether it fits the career trajectory you've built. The self, which Jung distinguished sharply from the ego, is not the part of you that wants to be liked. It is the part that knows what you're here to do, and it has been communicating that knowledge in a register the ego prefers to ignore. The person who has genuinely heard their vocation rarely describes it as inspiration. More often, they describe it as an inconvenient certainty, something they know they have to do, combined with every reason why doing it makes no sense. The ego provides the reasons. The self provides the certainty. The tension between them is precisely what the purpose frameworks are designed to dissolve too quickly, by giving you a rational answer before you've sat long enough with the irrational one. Jung observed that the smaller the personality, the dimmer and more unconscious the voice becomes, until it merges with the surrounding society, and vocation is replaced by collective necessities. Collective necessities are what other people decided was important. They are not yours. The question worth sitting with before the next part is what you're calling your purpose something you chose or something you've been avoiding choosing. The self does not wait for you to be ready. It has been speaking for years through channels the ego learned to dismiss as noise. Jung identified 4 of these channels with precision, not as metaphors, as psychic facts that operate with the same reliability as a blood test. His analogy, drawn from his clinical work. The dream, he wrote in Modern Man, In Search of a Soul, portrays the inner situation of the dreamer with a truth and reality that the conscious mind refuses, entirely or in part, to accept. The ego does not decide what the dream says. It only decides whether to listen. The first channel is the recurring dream. Not dreams in general, the specific image, scene, or theme that returns across months or years. A door you never open. A place you keep going back to. A version of yourself doing something your waking life has never allowed. Recurring dreams are the self's way of making a point the ego has not yet agreed to receive. The content rarely means what it appears to mean on the surface. A dream about drowning is not a prediction. It is a report on something in your psyche that is asking for air. The second channel is specific envy. This one is harder to admit. Envy in the abstract, wanting what others have in general, says little. But the envy that locks onto one particular person doing one particular thing, the kind that arrives with a slight burn of shame, that one is a compass. Jung understood projection as a mechanism by which the psyche externalizes what it cannot yet claim internally. The person you envy is not your enemy. They are carrying something that belongs to you. The shame you feel about the envy is not a character flaw. It is the ego's discomfort at being caught wanting something it decided was not permitted. The third channel is the persistent fantasy. The scenario you return to privately, not because it is realistic, but because it will not leave. You have already dismissed it. Too late, too impractical, too much to lose. The self is not interested in those objections. It keeps generating the image because the image is information, and information does not disappear because you refuse to read it. The fourth channel is the restlessness that achievements fail to resolve. You reach the goal, the ego set, the promotion, the relationship, the number in the bank account, and the sense of something missing returns within weeks. The ego interprets this as a character problem, a failure of gratitude or discipline. Jung read it differently. The restlessness is the self indicating that the ego's map and the self's direction have diverged, and that no amount of progress in the wrong direction closes the gap. None of these channels require a therapist to read. They require honesty about what you already know and have been quietly setting aside. In the next part, we examine the mechanism that makes that setting aside feel not just reasonable, but necessary, and why the ego's resistance to the calling is not the obstacle, but the most precise signal of all. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. Jung made an observation that most people who encounter it spend years trying to disprove. The closer the calling gets to the truth, the stronger the resistance becomes. The ego does not resist at random. It resists in proportion to how much the calling threatens the identity it has built. This is not weakness. The ego constructed that identity for survival. Every role you learned to play, every ambition you allowed yourself, every version of success you decided was acceptable, each was a response to real conditions. The family that needed you stable, the culture that punished deviation, the experiences that taught you what happened to people who wanted too much or in the wrong direction. The ego adapted. It learned the shape of the permitted life and built accordingly. Asking it to dismantle that structure in service of a calling from the unconscious is not a small request. To the ego, it reads as a threat to everything that has kept you functional. Jung wrote that the development of personality is a favor that must be paid for dearly. The price is almost always the same: the death of the current identity, not a metaphorical death, the actual dissolution of the self-concept you have been maintaining, the responsible one, the practical one, the one who does not disrupt, the one who has already sacrificed enough and does not ask for more. Vocation requires that you stop being that person. The ego reads this as annihilation and responds accordingly. The response has a recognizable shape. It arrives as practical reasoning. Now is not the right time. You have responsibilities. You are too old, or too young, or too far down one path to turn. Other people depend on you. You would be throwing away everything you built. Each of these arguments can be true and simultaneously function as resistance. Truth does not make a reason any less a defense. Jung noticed something further. The neurotic symptom, the anxiety, the depression, the chronic sense of meaninglessness that resists every intervention, frequently conceals a vocation the person has refused to live. Behind the neurotic perversion, he wrote, is concealed the person's destiny, the growth of personality, the full realization of the life will that is born with the individual. The symptom is the psyche's attempt to force toward the surface what the ego has been suppressing. The restlessness is not malfunction. It is the calling pressing against the structure built to contain it. This reframes resistance entirely. The ego's most elaborate objections are not evidence that the calling is wrong. They are evidence that the calling is close enough to feel dangerous. A vague longing attracts mild discomfort. A precise calling attracts organized opposition. From the ego, from the people around you who have relied on your current identity, and from every internalized voice that once had authority over what you were permitted to want. The objection you return to most often, the reason you give yourself when you imagine actually following the direction the self has been pointing. That specific objection is worth examining more carefully than anything else. It is not a warning. It is a map. In the next part, we look at the specific tools Jung used in practice, how he worked with the signals the self sends, and what it looks like to move toward a calling rather than continuing to explain why you can't. Jung was not a mystic who told patients to follow their dreams and trust the universe. He was a clinician who developed specific methods for making the unconscious legible. The tools exist, they are learnable, and you do not need a therapist's office to begin using them. The first is the simplest. Write down your dreams immediately on waking, before you speak to anyone, before you check your phone, before the rational mind begins its editing work. Not a summary. The actual images, the atmosphere, the details that seem irrelevant. Jung treated dreams the way a diagnostician treats a blood test, as a report on the interior situation, carrying information the conscious mind did not generate and cannot override. The inner voice, he wrote, speaks through the inner life in solitude. The morning, before the day's obligations close in, is when that solitude is most available. The question to bring to a recurring dream is not, what does this mean? But what is this showing me about my life that I have not been willing to see? The distinction matters. The first question sends you to symbolism dictionaries and interpretation frameworks. The second sends you back to your own life, which is where the answer lives. The second tool is projection analysis, and it begins with a specific practice. For the next 2 weeks, notice every strong reaction, admiration, envy, contempt, irritation, you have toward another person, and ask what quality in them is producing the reaction. Jung observed that we project most intensely onto others the qualities we cannot yet integrate in ourselves. The person whose freedom you find infuriating is demonstrating a permission you have not given yourself. The person whose work makes you feel a particular kind of longing, not general admiration, but something closer to recognition, is pointing towards something in you that has not yet found its form. Write the quality down, not the person's name, the quality. Then ask where in your own life that quality has been present and denied, expressed and punished, wanted and refused. The third tool is what Jung called active imagination, and in its simplest form, it requires only a quiet hour and a willingness to let the images that arise in a relaxed state speak without immediately being evaluated. Sit without a screen, without a task, without an agenda. Let whatever appears, images, scenes, figures, memories, fantasies, arrive without commentary. Then, in writing, give those images a voice. Ask the figure in the recurring dream what it wants. Write the answer down before you decide whether it makes sense. The ego's job is to evaluate. Its job in this practice is to wait. These are not exercises in self-improvement. They are practices in attention. Specifically, attention to the self's communications, which have been arriving for years in a register the ego was trained to dismiss as fantasy, distraction, or wishful thinking. The contents that come to light through this kind of attention, Jung wrote, are wholly in accord with the inner voice and point to a predestined vocation, which when accepted and assimilated by the conscious mind, conduces to the development of personality. The final part is about what happens when you stop managing these signals and begin moving toward them, and what Jung actually meant by living in the direction of your purpose rather than arriving at it. Jung never promised that following the self would feel like fulfillment. He promised something more precise and considerably less comfortable, that following it would make you whole, and that wholeness and comfort are not the same thing. The purpose frameworks promise arrival, a destination you locate, claim, and inhabit permanently. Jung's understanding of vocation has no such destination. He described it as a direction that reveals itself progressively. Each step you take toward what the self is pointing to, making visible the next step, which was invisible before you moved. You do not find your purpose and then live it. You live toward it, and the living is the finding. This is a meaningful distinction for anyone who has spent years waiting for certainty before acting. The certainty does not come first. It comes, when it comes at all, as a consequence of movement. The executive whose dreams Jung described in his clinical work, the one whose recurring nightmares showed a train derailing as it accelerated past its limits, received a precise message about direction long before he was willing to receive it. Jung noted simply that the man's destiny followed the course the dream had outlined. He had the information. He chose the ego's ambition over the self's warning. The cost was exact and predictable. This is not a cautionary tale about failure. It is a description of what it looks like when the gap between ego direction and self-direction is large and the ego wins. The symptom, the anxiety, the hollow achievement, the life that looks correct from the outside and feels airless from the inside, is the gap made physical. Closing the gap does not require a dramatic rupture. Jung was precise here too. Personality develops from germs that are hard or impossible to discern at first, and only our deeds reveal who we are. You do not need to dismantle your life to begin moving toward your calling. You need to make one decision that the ego would not have made yesterday. One conversation you have been postponing. 1 hour given to the work the self has been indicating rather than the work the ego finds safer. The calling does not ask for everything at once. It asks for fidelity. The word Jung chose carefully from the Greek pistis, meaning trustful loyalty. Loyalty to the law of your own being. The cost of that loyalty is real. Some people in your life have organized themselves around the identity you are being asked to outgrow. Some of the structures that make your days predictable will not survive the change in direction. Jung was not romantic about this. He wrote that the development of personality is a charisma and a curse, and that its first fruit is the conscious and unavoidable separation of the individual from the undifferentiated crowd. Vocation isolates. It asks you to carry something other people around you may not recognize or value. That is not a reason to refuse it. It is simply the price, stated clearly, without consolation. The person who refuses the calling does not escape the cost. They pay it differently, in the accumulated weight of the unlived life, in the restlessness that no achievement resolves, in the specific grief of arriving at the end of a life that was functional and safe and belonged, in some essential way, to someone else. You already know which direction the self is pointing. you have known for longer than you've admitted. The only question that remains is the one Jung spent his entire career asking, in different forms, of every person who sat across from him. How much longer are you willing to live as a stranger to yourself? And if this video named something you've been avoiding, comment, "I hear it." If this video landed the way it should, the one on your screen right now will too. Click to keep watching.